What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of WNBA Today on CLNS. And this time, I'm here to react to the WNBA Draft Lottery, which took place on Sunday evening and had results that were not very surprising based on the projected odds. Everything kind of shook up the way that was expected. But now we know what the draft lottery order is going to be, and we can think about what those implications are going to look like. The Dallas Wings had the league's worst record last year, and as such, they had about a 42% chance to win the WNBA Draft Lottery on Sunday night, and they did that. And so, for the second consecutive year, the Wings will have the number one pick. Last year, it was a no-brainer selection, I think, and they draw Paige Beckers, who was a near unanimous Rookie of the Year, was named an All-Star, an All WNBA member. Like she just had an awesome rookie season. And now they're going to have another number one pick. And I think this one is a little bit less clear who they're going to select. It's probably going to depend quite a bit on what the next few months look like here, which was not really the case the last few years. You know, everybody knew Caitlin Clark was going to go first. Everybody knew Paige Beckers was going to go first. Honestly, Aaliyah Boston the year before that, I think she was kind of a shoo-in as well. So this is an interesting one. I feel like the hype around like who has the number one pick wasn't quite as substantial, but certainly does help to have a higher pick, even if you choose to trade that pick. It's an asset to have, right? And so that's the first thing I would say is the number one pick this year means something a little bit different than it did in years past, and that ultimately is expected, and we kind of knew that was going to happen going into the year. The other thing I'll say is that in general, when getting back-to-back number one picks is a really good sign for a franchise. Obviously, that's kind of how the Las Vegas Aces dynasty was born. And you see now with Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark, back-to-back number one picks, like the Indiana Fever have been able to quickly rebuild and become a playoff team. And so usually it's a really good indicator for the franchise kind of exiting from this period of like, we're one of the worst teams in the league and heading into the period of, okay, we're starting to have building blocks and actually be able to put together a really competitive roster. So the big question is, Dallas has the number one pick. Who are they going to select? And I think it's way too early to know. ESPN has AZ Fudd as their number one selection, and she has been scorching hot to start the year. She obviously gives Dallas shooting, something that they've long desired, and she has great backcourt chemistry with Paige Beckers. They won a national championship together in UConn. And so I think AZ, if she can stay healthy, which for the last year she's been able to be on the floor and be really impactful at that, could certainly be in the mix for the number one overall selection. After the Wings getting the number one overall pick, the rest of the lottery panned out kind of as was projected if you were going to go by odds. So the Minnesota Lynx now have the number two overall pick. The Seattle Storm have the number three overall pick. Washington Mystics have the fourth overall pick. And the Chicago Sky have the fifth overall pick. And then number 6 and 7 will be a coin toss between the two new expansion teams. So the Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire. And to be honest with you, I was kind of thinking like maybe expansion teams should have a better pick than 6 or 7, just because they are really starting from scratch. And I don't know that what the Valkyries did in year one is going to be replicated. And historically, that's not really been how expansion teams have joined the league and immediately made the playoffs. But that's neither here nor there. We'll see kind of how that pans out. But that's the top 5 right now. And obviously for the Sky, they remain the only non-expansion team in WNBA history to never have a number one overall pick. And they didn't help themselves, in recent years. They haven't always had the best odds, and in this case, they had the lowest odds of the 5 teams in the lottery. So it's no shock that they end up having the number 5 overall pick. And I do think that this year, it's like I said earlier, like it's not a complete disaster to not have the top pick in this draft, because I don't know who that's going to be. I don't think there's going to be consensus. And in fact, different teams would probably land on a different player as their first overall pick. And, the next few months, the NCAA season could showcase one player as being a better selection than another. And so maybe this won't be much of a conversation when it's all said and done. One thing I will say is Awa Pham, who is the Spanish center, I think she's 19, 20 years old, super high ceiling. And I think you started to look at these younger prospects from overseas, like a Dominique Malonga. And I do think there's something to be said about how, historically, especially in recent history, the WNBA has not recruited a ton of players from overseas, but I think that that's going to change, just as we've seen that change in the NBA, even just in my lifetime. And she, from everything that I've seen, I've watched her highlights, I've watched some of her scouting tapes. She seems to be a super high ceiling player that is going to, require some time, and it comes in probably not as ready to impact winning right away. And so I love her as the number 2 overall pick for the Lynx, because the Lynx are obviously a win now team that have had so many all-time greats kind of pass through that organization, and they will probably have an opportunity for her to grow. And you have Nafisa Collier there, you have Sheila Reeve there, like a lot of mentorship as well. So for a young player and a center that has a really high ceiling, I think that could be a really good spot for her. Olivia Miles is who ESPN currently has projected to go 3rd overall, and she was in that same mix last year around this time and transfers to TCU from Notre Dame, and so far has just looked awesome. So I think she is another player. I have a feeling Olivia Miles is going to make a transition to the league that kind of surprises people a little bit. You think about how Sonia Citron was able to kind of seamlessly become a WNBA player. Obviously, they have different games, but I think Olivia is right now one of the best guards in the NCAA, and now has an additional year of experience under her belt, which is going to help, because we talk all the time about how hard it is for guards to make the leap to the WNBA, and that additional time of getting stronger, getting better, getting faster, all of those things really helps when it comes to that acclimation. And you look at like Kelsey Plum and players that have talked about how hard that transition was. 1 year under their belt of getting stronger, it helps. And so I think Olivia is going to be an impact player right away. And whether she'll end up being a top 3 pick, TBD. I think the whole top 5 is pretty interchangeable right now. But she is certainly up there. And then ESPN projects Lauren Betts to be the 4th overall pick, which, to be honest, she hasn't had like the greatest start to the season. I do think she's probably going to end up being selected before that. Like, ultimately, she is one of the impact players in this league, and there are going to be teams that need a center. She's 6'7", and those kinds of players don't grow on trees. So as it currently stands, like ESPN's projection has the Mystics selecting Betts with the 4th overall pick, but you might see the Minnesota Lynx wanting a center that is more of a ready-to-go center right now. And therefore, maybe Betts comes in and complements Nafisa Collier and gives them that size that they oftentimes lacked at spots last year. Or maybe the Storm. I mean, I think that would be kind of a weird fit. The Storm have Dominique Malonga. Like, I don't know, maybe you have 2 of those kinds of players. Maybe even the Dallas Wings are considering Lauren Betts as their starting center. I mean, the front court was a big problem for Dallas last year. And so I think AZ right now could be the number 1 pick. She could also be the number 5 pick. And all of these players are pretty interchangeable. But I will say, what I've noticed about these international prospects is that typically as scouting continues and as time moves forward, these kinds of players typically rise in mock drafts. And Dominique Malonga, by the time it was all said and done, like, she was the number 2 overall pick. And I think many people felt like she could have even been a legitimate candidate for number 1. I think if it wasn't Paige Beckers, she very well may have passed like the typical guard coming out of college that year. Paige just had a resume and kind of a consensus about her game that I think separated her in that sense. So and the 5th name that ESPN has, and I think this is somebody that a lot of us have been watching for a long time, is Flau'jae Johnson, who has spent her entire career at LSU, has been great in the biggest moments. She could have entered the WNBA last year. She decided to give it another season. I always think that's a good decision for these players, is to get more experience in college, because especially for guards, we've seen how difficult the transition is. But Flau'jae, I think, will be an impact guard right away in this league as well. Currently would be projected to go to the Chicago Sky. But I don't view this mock draft as having a ton of weight behind it, because ultimately I think you could see things shaking up in a number of different ways. And again, their senior year season is going to indicate quite a bit. Like, if AZ's right now, she's shooting above 50% from 3, like, that's not going to hold. But if she can demonstrate that she is available all season long, that the shooting is reliable. I mean, I think everybody knows that part of her game. How has she grown as a playmaker, as a defender? Like, those are the parts of her game that I think, front offices are going to have more questions about. That could certainly kind of impact whether she's the top overall pick or not. And obviously fit and all of those things matter. But in my view, like, if you are a lottery team, you should, generally speaking, pick the best available player. So yes, maybe you need a guard, maybe you need shooting, maybe you need a center, but like, longer term is the key. And so I think you're going to want to go with the best available player on the board, which right now might not be super clear. And if you heard Kurt Miller's press conference after the Wings won the WNBA Draft Lottery, like he went through the fact that there were a bunch of great candidates. And he said that he's already getting a lot of calls to trade for the number 1 overall pick, but you're seeing that it is not quite what it was last year, where it was just like everybody knew it was going to be Paige. So that makes kind of this college season more interesting from the WNBA lens. I mostly watch college through the context of like, okay, which players are going to be selected, who's going to fit where. And certainly I have my eye right now on Flage, on Lauren Betts, on AZ Fudd, and several others as well. I think that there's a whole bunch of players that could kind of emerge into that mix.
You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this basketball season on PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. There are some players that have been going absolutely crazy. You look at a Luka Doncic, you look at a Steph Curry, who has just been playing out of his mind, Kevin Durant, Austin Reeves, all these guys, you can pick more on them. PrizePicks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Play PrizePicks to get action on basketball in more than 40-plus states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. On PrizePicks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose Flex Play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you want the biggest payout, go for the power play. No matter your play, PrizePicks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right.
I mentioned 6 and 7 is going to be a coin toss for the 2 new expansion teams. The number 8th overall pick will be for the Golden State Valkyries. Washington Mystics have the 9th. The Indiana Fever have the 10th overall pick. Washington Mystics also have the 11th. So they once again have 3 picks in the first round. It's a really good spot to be in. And we saw last year just how impactful from the jump Sonia Citron and Kiki Arefin were. And that's, that was just to help propel them to a pretty good start to the season. They're in a good spot once again. And then the 12th pick will go to the Connecticut Sun. 13th will go to the Atlanta Dream. 14th to the Seattle Storm, and 15th again to the Connecticut Sun. So if you're noticing, there is a team that is absent here from the lottery, and that is from the first round, and that is the Los Angeles Sparks. So that is, something that they were kind of near the bottom of league standings and not make the playoffs. Not a great spot to be in to not have a first round draft selection, but there will be trade talks. It's possible those will trade into the first round. It's possible that teams are going to want to try to trade up. Like there's a lot of time between now and then right now, obviously an entire college basketball season as well. But my initial reaction to this is the Dallas is in a good spot because historically, when you look at franchises that are able to win the lottery 2 years in a row, it's a good spot to be in. Obviously, we've seen that with the Aces. We've seen that with the Fever. And you're now just accruing young talent. And in the WNBA, like it's a league driven by young talent, right? Eventually, those players become franchise players, franchise cornerstones. And while you always have free agency and trades and other means to acquire those players, like getting them under rookie contracts is a really, really good place to start. So I'm really curious to see how it's all going to pan out. Let me know who you think the Wings should select with the number 1 overall pick. Who do you like for Minnesota? Who do you like for the Sky? I'm really curious about kind of people's viewpoints, especially if you're a fan of a particular team. Is there a player that you're currently eyeing? I honestly think it's pretty much a blank slate right now. And anybody that thinks they know so much could change in the coming months here. And rosters could change. And obviously the players' prospects kind of standings could change as well because there's so much basketball to be played between now and the draft. I'll just note that, obviously different publications, different media members have different projections right now. The Athletic, Sabrina Merchant, she has Awa Pham actually going number 1 and kind of really anchoring this front court in Dallas. And even though she might need a little bit more time and is not necessarily on Paige Becker's timeline, like if you think she's the best available prospect, you probably want to just go ahead and grab her, as I mentioned. Sabrina also has the Minnesota Lynx selecting Olivia Miles, and I'll just flag, like, this was the Chicago Sky's pick. That's why Minnesota has this pick. So Minnesota, despite being one of the best teams in the league the last few years, is in a really good spot to have a lottery selection, and she probably would have been a lottery pick last year as well. So just a natural point guard, and we all know Minnesota has not really had a perfectly natural point guard. I think Courtney Williams is kind of locked into that role, and Natisha Heideman's done well as a backup, but she would be a kind of more pure point guard, whereas Courtney has kind of had to teach to kind of adjust and acclimate to that position. And then according to this mock draft that The Athletic put out, Seattle would select AZ Fudd with the 3rd overall pick. So it's the same players. The Mystics take Lauren Betts 4th overall here, and then the Sky take Flage as their 5th pick. So it's the same 5 players that both publications currently have going in the top 5. That is my tentative top 5, and there's other names of players that have kind of could float in there, but those are the guys, those are the girls that I'm currently looking at. And we'll see how it pans out. As I mentioned, lots of time between now and then. And there were no major surprises here. I'm always fascinated when like a team that had the 6th best odds wins the lottery, like what we saw with last year in the NBA Draft Lottery, where Cooper Flagg goes to the Dallas Mavericks, despite the fact they were a year removed from the WNBA Finals, for the NBA Finals, I should say. In this case, it was pretty much as projected, which probably for the best. It's the way that it's supposed to shake up. And different players are probably going to have destinations that they think will be better suited for their games, and that's a part of the conversation too. I think something that people don't think a lot about is that before there is a selection from the franchise side, there are a lot of conversations with players' camps and agents. And so sometimes players maybe could have been selected higher, but if they make clear they want to go somewhere else, that can sometimes have an influence. Not always, but sometimes. So we'll see how everything shakes up. Congratulations to the Dallas Wings. Let me know in the comment section who you think your team should select, who you're most excited about as a prospect, what your thoughts were on the lottery results, and we'll have more coverage on WNBA Today on CLNS coming shortly.